Hello and welcome. This is Rasheem. This is an episode of The Counter Narrative, and tonight's focus is going to be looking at the politics of social work and asking the question, do racialized social workers belong in policy development? Tonight we have a special guest, Candace Kachapaw. I hope I said that right, Candace.
You did.
Okay.
You did.
Great. Who has a master's degree in social work. And I'm going to allow her to introduce herself and tell us a little bit more about herself. So, Candace, tell us who you are. Tell us something that you're passionate about, and what is your particular interest in this topic?
Okay. So, hi everyone. I'm Candace Kachapaw. I live here in Toronto, Canada, and I just finished, as Rasheem just said, I just finished my Master of Social Work. Just graduated 2 weeks ago, so I'm freshly minted, like I like to say. Woohoo! So something I'm really passionate about is changing the way things are, changing the status quo, and changing things not necessarily from the outside, but from the inside, participating in change. That's what I'm really passionate about. And so my research now, the politics of social work, do racialized social workers belong in the practice space of public policy development, is really about that. It's about social workers who do the frontline work on a day-to-day basis. You know, day in and day out, you're out there advocating for your clients to get access to better services, to receiving resources that are available but closed off to certain groups of people. We know the ins and outs of the systems, and we know particularly the ins and outs of institutional or structural racism. So this research is all about, well, the fact that we know the ins and outs should lead us to want to participate and to want to engage in how policies are written, not just for our clients, but for society in general. So that's really the drive and the motivation for this research that I undertook.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about what exactly attracted you to the field of social work to begin with.
When I was born in and lived in Jamaica for about 14 years before I came to Canada, and I just remember living in impoverished conditions. I still was able to have dinner every night and go to school and get access to, you know, the necessities of life. But I remember my neighborhood kids, my neighbors, they had it really rough. And I just remember thinking, if I had the opportunity to make a change to the system, how resources were shared between, you know, the haves and the have-nots, I would definitely take the opportunity to make that change. And so I think when I left Jamaica, I had that idea still in my head, but I wasn't sure how it would materialize. I wasn't sure what opportunities would present themselves so that I could make those changes. So I just kept thinking on that belief that if there's a way to make a change, I need to be a part of the change. I need to be a part of that solution.
Mm-hmm. I totally understand that. So as we jump into this topic of the politics of social workers, and do racialized social workers belong in policy development?
Mm-hmm.
As we talk about that, kind of set the frame up for us and tell us a little bit more about what are some of the issues around social work in general as a profession. What are some of the key issues or key challenges that are around it, and how having racialized social workers might improve that situation?
Well, when I started to formulate a research question, I started to think about the education that I was receiving in the Canadian context, the social work education I was receiving. And part of the problem for me was the construction of the curriculum itself. So I looked at 3 different descriptions of what the mandate of social work and the ethical principles that social work is governed by from the International Federation of social workers, and from the American version, the National Association of Social Workers, and then I looked at the Canadian Association of Social Workers, and these are regulatory bodies in social work. And I looked at their description of how the practice is shaped, and how the education is shaped based on the mandate of the governing bodies. And what I found was that there was a disjuncture between the priority of social work based on where you are. So if you're in Canada, you have a priority, your priority focus is on direct practice. And direct practice means frontline social work, right? So your one-to-one counseling, your community development, your community advocacy. But there was no focus on structural issues, right? So how do social workers engage at the institutional level, or at the national or international level, where the broader context of discrimination and human rights violations and socioeconomic conditions, there was really no focus in the Canadian context where social work is concerned. So I thought it necessary to look at how the social work education itself impacts where social workers generally choose to work, where social workers generally see themselves going. And what I recognize is that in the Canadian context, because there's so much emphasis on direct practice, social workers kind of get funneled or channeled into frontline positions only. And when you're channeled into frontline positions only in employment, you pretty much, you go into the office, you deal with your caseload, and when the 9 to 5 is over, you head home and you start again tomorrow, right? And there's, for me, I think we're doing a disservice to the profession of social work by only having that one view of practice, that we can only go into the office and get what we need to get done and then leave, and that's all we're responsible for. You know what I mean?
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that a lot of the social workers are being educated and brought into the profession and primarily to focus on direct services. Exactly. And it's not helping them serve beyond the direct services of what they're providing.
Exactly. Yeah.
I want to let you know too. Two people are saying hi to you in the chat.
Hi.
Sinthu says hi, and EvanM43 says you're looking poised.
I'm looking poised. Awesome. Hi, Sinthu is a colleague of mine, and we did our MSW together. And her research is very, very similar to mine. She looks at the placement process in the MSW program. So Sinthu is a person that you might consider talking to sometime also.
I was just saying she should inbox me. I'll definitely reach out.
Definitely. She's the person to talk to too.
And as we get deeper, I don't want to assume that everyone who watches this later will know everything that we're talking about. So if you're just joining us now, or if you're watching this on replay, this is the counter narrative. This topic is the politics of social work, and do racialized social work belong in policy development? And right now we're talking with Candace about that, and she's sharing some of her research that she's collected and done in her MSW studies. So one of the terms that I want us to make clear on that you've used is, could you give in your own words, definition of what racialized means, because not everyone understands that term. And then also, could you define institutional racism and the impact that has on the field of social work?
For sure. So I had to kind of backtrack when I used the term racialized, because a number of people asked me, what does that mean? And I realized it's contextual, right? So here in Canada, racialized is understood to mean people of color. right? I was speaking with someone from CSI, I think it's the Center for Social Inclusion, and they're based in Seattle. And when I said the term racialized, they said, "What do you mean by that?" And my reasoning for using that term was that it's quite broad, right? So, but in the simplest of terms, it just means people who are non-white, right? So it's inclusive of every person of color that belongs to whatever category of race you want to place them, as long as you don't place them in the category of white.
Got it. And
Okay.
you mentioned institutional racism. Can you tell us a little bit more about what exactly that means and what is the role that institutional racism might play in the field of social work?
So institutional racism for me means that in particular areas, so let's take the area of employment, particular jobs are only open or they're reserved for non-racialized people. So in the context of my research, where I was looking at public policy development, we know that's dealing with the public sector, right, and public administration. And what I realized based on the comments from my research participants was that even though legitimately we had the capacity, we had the knowledge, we had the expertise, and to some extent we had the experience to operate effectively in public policy and public administration, because of systemic racism, right? Hiring practices, the education that social workers receive, we were excluded, or we didn't quote unquote match up to the expectations of or the qualifications it took to occupy certain spaces, primarily or particularly in employment in the public sector. So institutionalized racism or institutional discrimination takes the shape of denial of access to particular participation in a specific area in society.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things too that makes it, to me, so significant for the field of social work in terms of institutional racism is it impacts the political aspect of the institution, especially as it relates to the type of policies that are developed.
Absolutely.
And then if you are working as a direct service provider, then by the time something gets to you, there's already a policy. So you're at that point just carrying out whatever the particular policy is.
Absolutely.
So even if a person is doing direct service, Candace, I think what you provide and what you bring is so significant. Because even if I do decide to go in direct service and I'm not creating policy, it's good for me to be informed, to know what policies are driving some of these decisions.
Exactly.
How that's working. Also, Pastor Maureen, another person said hi, was Pastor Maureen.
Hi, Pastor Maureen. she's one of my mentors.
Oh, fantastic.
Yes.
Tell me, what are some of the trends that you're seeing in the field of social work?
Well, actually, it's quite interesting because before I did this research, I wasn't really tracking any kind of social work influence or engagement with any kind of policy activity. And then when I started to think more deeply and seriously about this topic, I started to hear discussions about the importance of social workers being involved, being engaged, knowing the policy process, knowing how when policies get legislated and they have to implement them, what impact it has on the direct service user. So as I continued to study a little bit more, I started to look not just on the Canadian and American context. I actually started to look over in to look at information that was coming out of Israel, things that were coming out of the UK, you know, things that were coming out of Australia. I started to look at all those things and hear and listen to what people had to say. And what I realized is that yes, social workers definitely have the right, we have the expertise, we have the knowledge to participate, and actually it's mandatory for us to participate at the policy development level, because it's a part of the expectation of the profession of social work to do that. Right. And so as I continue to do a little bit more research, what I realized also is that the socioeconomic conditions of Black people particularly is taking center stage. Again, a lot of this is based on what is happening in the US with Black Lives Matter, and something that's happening now in Toronto mainly, but it's beginning to extend across Canada, is the focus of anti-Black racism that's happening primarily in education, but there is a little bit more extent towards the interactions between Black men primarily and the police, right?
Can you speak more to why? Oh, echo. Can you speak more to why exactly does having racialized social workers, why does that matter? Why is that even important to have that?
So an argument that I make about why racialized social workers matter so much is that I can speak to my experience myself as a Black woman and a Black female social worker, is that I came from a background of poverty. I understand what poverty looks like. I understand what housing insecurity looks like. I understand what not having enough money to, you know, pay your bills and do all that. I understand those things. And so when I sit in my office and I say I'm seeing John today, and John is a Black male who, you know, comes from this same or similar socioeconomic background that I am presenting from, I can understand and I can say, oh, if I'm accessing Ontario Works, which is a welfare safety net system here for low income individuals and families, if I'm seeing John and John says to me, look, I've been looking for work for 6-7 months and I haven't had any luck, you know, and Ontario Works is telling me that the next job that I go for an interview for, I have to take it or they're gonna kick me off the system. Hey, I know what you're going through. And for me as a social worker, I can maneuver through the system and I can say, okay, here you can access this support over here. If you go here, or if you word your application this way, that, you know, you'll be able to qualify for more support, those things. So I'm bringing a level of expertise to the job, but I'm also bringing personal experience, because as a racialized person, there are just some things within the broader political system, within the broader societal system, that a non-racialized person, a non-person of color, you don't necessarily know that firsthand. You know what I mean? You don't necessarily understand what it means to, you know, drive around with $5 gas in your car and hope that, you know, when you get to work, you don't really have to go visit a client today because you might not have the money to drive back home after you're done. You know what I mean? So those experiences that racialized social workers share and can draw from when they're meeting with clients, I think it's absolutely vital to have that spin and to have that information included when we're writing policies. Because one of my research participants, she's actually a non-racialized person, and she's a policy advocate and a policy analyst. She said the difficult thing about policy development right now is that the people who are writing them, particularly when we talk about social policies that deal with healthcare and education and housing and all those things that that the lower class, quote unquote, lower class people have to deal with on a regular basis. What she said was that the people who are writing social policies have no idea what social policies do for people. They have no idea the impact of how policies are written. If you're writing a social policy based on an austerity measure, you have no idea what the implications and what the impacts have on people who have to live through these support systems.
Right.
So,
Point. I whoa, my echoing. I also like the point that you bring up about. I'm feeling like if I lean back, it'll stop echoing so much. I also like the point that you bring up about how your experiences are valuable sources of information. And you speak a little bit, I mean, even though you didn't use the terminology, you speak a little bit about Black womanist epistemology, that your experiences as a Black woman are valid sources of information. And if you are writing a policy, you may understand and know policy, but you don't know these particular experiences and the impacts that they have. So sometimes policies don't match up with what the desired outcome is.
Absolutely.
Can you say a little bit to what are some of the misconceptions that are surround these different areas? For one, what are some of the misconceptions that surround social work? What are some of the misconceptions that surround policy, and what are some of the misconceptions that surround policy development?
So first and foremost, social work, I argue that social work is a marginalized profession itself, right? So why I feel that argument is valid is because partly it's to blame social work itself, because for whatever reason we've drifted away as a profession. We've drifted away from the inclusive aspect of direct practice and the structural approach to social work. Right, so the structural approach, meaning we're partnering with governments and non-governmental organizations to say, hey, when we're dealing with foreign policy, when we're dealing with immigration, when we're dealing with economics, taxation, when we're dealing with healthcare, when we're dealing with all these things, we need to include social work, because social workers generally see all these people in different categories and different chapters of their life. Right, when we consider globalization and how that has impacted third world countries and third world developing countries, let's say that, and developed countries, when we see the interaction between people who are leaving poorer countries to come to Western countries, and the living conditions are different. The work experience is different when you have to match up your qualifications that you had when you were home based on when you come to Canada or you come to the US, your qualifications don't match up. When we consider all those things, social work has such a huge part to play in resettlement, in making sure that there's equity. Now, I have to qualify what I'm saying by saying this. I have to put in a disclaimer that I'm not preaching that by social workers being involved in the policy development process, that is going to solve all the issues that we have in society. This is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that social work, because we have our hands in all these different facets of society, it's important for us to be at the discussion table. It's important for us to have an input in the services that we as direct care workers are going to be implementing, right? When I said that social work is marginalized as a profession itself, if we think on the lines of ideological approaches, from a professional standpoint, social work is not considered an elite profession, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not considered at the level of law or medicine or or economics or anything like that. Social work, it's kind of it's been downgraded, and the level of respect that you get from professional respect that you get, you don't necessarily see it in social work. Now,
Mm-hmm.
in the academic portion of social work, there are, of course, renowned researchers and scholars who have done great work and receive the acclaim for their work, but those generally are one-offs, right? You don't hear a lot of names out there saying, hey, do you know this social worker? Do you know what I mean? Do you know what they've done for society, kind of thing? So that's what I mean when I say social work itself is a marginalized profession,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And there's so much too in as it relates to social work that is borrowed from other social sciences. um, what can I do about this sound? So there's so much in social work again that's borrowing from other sciences, and there's so many times where you may go into an organization wherein there are a lot of social workers, but say social workers aren't playing leadership roles.
Mm-hmm.
Social workers aren't the directors or the managers. They are the people who are working in the field. They are providing the care. They are the caseworkers, but they're not in managing positions, which goes to your point, Candace, of further marginalizing that profession when we have a sea of social workers, but we hire an MBA to come in and run our organizations, which
Absolutely.
happens so often. You actually have a question. And that question is, what recommendations would you suggest to support racialized social workers entry/development in policy practice? So what advice would you suggest to support racialized social workers at the entry level of policy practice?
That's a great question. So first and foremost, I'm going to plug myself here. So in the process of doing my MSW research, I did a supervised course, right? I developed a 5-week policy practice training workshop that I've piloted at York University. So the goal behind this course is to introduce social workers to the policy development process and how they can engage with the policy development process. The thinking also behind this is, when I did my undergrad, there was of course there was some courses that had to deal with the history of social work, how social work came to be, and in some courses you learned about social policies. You learned about the child welfare system. You learned about the education system. You learned about some of the really bad situations that happen, primarily in child welfare, right? The unfortunate cases of children, dying in care prior to being removed from their homes. Some really, atrocious things that happened. And when I think about that, I think why are we so retroactive? Why aren't we being proactive? And why are we sitting back and waiting for things to happen so that's when we bring attention to it? So for me, when I started to think about this course, I thought, I think I have to take it to a basic level. I have to, because again, a disservice that's happening in education is that the education policy has taken out an important and integral topic, which is civic engagement, right? So whether it's at the high school level or the college or university level, unless it's something that you are going to practice in your career, it's not something that's offered on a regular day-to-day kind of subject basis, right? So when I created this course, I thought, I want to make it general enough that first and foremost, it's not going to exclude any social workers, first and foremost. So everyone who's interested, it's an elective, it's being piloted right now, not as an elective, but as an add-on to a policy frameworks course. And I have to thank Dr. Luann Good-Gingrich, who gave me the opportunity to, she shared part of her class with me for the fall session to allow me to introduce this policy practice workshop. And so right now I'm actually getting feedback from a lot of the students who are asking the question, you know, this is my first experience with the policy development process, with engagement. I don't know what I'm doing. I have no idea. And so that validates to me that this is something that's very important. And as a social worker, it's vital for us to know what we're implementing, how it's impacting our clients, how it's impacting us as workers, and how it's impacting our economy and our society in general.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And sorry, and to the point of how do I help racialized social workers? For me, again, it's about getting out there. It's about being visible, and it's about being open so that people can see that, you know, that people are doing this work, racialized people are doing this work, people of color are doing this work, and we're, you know, we're not just out there unreachable. We're not just, you know, in a bubble, and it's just because, you know, I happen to be in a privileged position, and I only retain this opportunity and this privilege for myself. No, I want to be able to be open to everyone who's interested. I don't mind sharing my contact information. I don't mind getting contacts or connections from people to say, hey, I'm interested in what you're doing. How do we build this thing, and how do we continue this work? I'm definitely open to that.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the things that you found in some of the research that you've done that has possibly surprised you about the practice of social work, and about the level to which it is inclusive in terms of people that are hired, education, or what have you? And I also want to, then after that, I want us to kind of end on a note of what's next for it. What are some, like, where does social work go from here type of thing. But first I want to know, what have you found in your research that has possibly informed you? And also, where does the practice of social work go from here, around increasing racialized social workers, increasing not just racialized social workers, but social workers in marginalized populations. So how do we get more social workers from LGBT, or even just from trans communities? How do we get more social workers that are numerical minorities, that are handy capable? Like, how do we enhance the field?
Okay, so your first question about, you know, what has surprised me, or what informs my continued focus on this topic. One of the data sources that, you know, kind of continue to fuel my drive to pursue this topic was a report that came out from the Wellesley Institute in 2011. And it came from Sheila Block and Grace Edward Galabuzzi. And what they looked at, they titled their report Canada's Color-Coded Labor Market. And what that report stated was a breakdown of where racialized people or people of color were mostly employed, right? And where they were mostly employed were service sector positions, right? And it was also broken down by gender. So so what the report stated was that for Black men and Black women who were seeking to pursue employment in public administration position in management roles, the percentage was 4.0 for men and 4.1 for women who were seeking to be employed in public administrative positions. And when I thought about that, now this was in 2011, right? And all the sources that I read prior to that, I read another article from Johnson in 2006, and her report. So this is 5 years prior to the color-coded labor market, and her report was similar. It was 1 in 33 people, 1 in 33 minority people was employed in the public sector. So the fact is that it doesn't matter how educated Black people or people of color are. It doesn't really matter if you're seeking to be employed in service in the service industry. Then there's an overrepresentation. If you are seeking to be employed in public sector spaces, pretty much what the data is saying is that there are significant barriers, and the barriers are based on race, not anything else, right? There's also other reports that say that you are screened out in the application process based on your postal code, or in the American context, based on your zip code, right? And so those things continues to drive me. Like, why are these things the way they are? Why do we have the data to support the argument, but yet very little is changing? You know what I mean?
Right.
That suggests to me that we have to move beyond doing advocacy outside of government. We have to move from the place of there's no interaction between government and social service agencies. There's no interaction between activists and government and lobbyists and activists and all that. We have to move beyond that place, because the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, right? So I argue that we have to present a multifaceted approach. And the only way to present a multifaceted approach is to have advocates on the outside, for sure, who are bringing attention to the issues, but also having activists on the inside working in government who are saying, hey, sounding the alarm. This is what's happening here. How do we change what's happening? Like, we're not okay with the status quo. We need a change. We need to see things differently.
Okay. No, that reminds me when you mentioned the aspect of advocate on the outside and an advocate on the inside. It reminds me of something that Patricia Hill Collins refers to as kind of the outsider within. So people like you, possibly even people like me, working in certain institutions are those advocates. So one of the arguments too that I hear that you're making so very well is, if you have more advocates on the inside, if you have more marginalized populations working within these institutions, not only does that increase the chances of them possibly rising higher in the ranks, but they can also advocate for participants that receive services at certain institutions.
Absolutely.
Now, another thing that I see, it seems like in the profession, is that there are challenges. There are things like institutional racism that does exist. But as a person, one of the questions too that I'm reminded of this from the question that Cynthia asked: if you are working within an institution that is racist, that is also paying your paycheck, how much is a person actually going to buck the system or push back? And what I've been able to see is people who have not found their place within the institution to be able to rise to their potential or even advocate, have then gone out and started their own nonprofit organizations, or they've taken up another approach. So my question to you is, one, if you're you're in and or part of an oppressive system, what are there any strategies that you recommend around navigating that? And or is the option to lean toward and start looking to getting more, see if we could get more jobs in the public sector, or even starting our own practices?
Absolutely. I can recall about, I would say maybe 2 years ago now, where I was working in an agency where I absolutely did not agree with some of their policies, and the policies were primarily dealing with frontline staff, and as most of us know who do frontline work, who who are social workers, and we do, or social service workers, and we do frontline work, we know that a lot of our clients, a lot of the people that we provide services to, are quite abusive. um, there's opportunities for trauma. There's a lot of things that us as workers go through, and compounded by the general abuse that we sometimes receive based on the agency that we're working in, is the fact that that extra layer of disadvantage, in that we are people of color, right? And in reality, sometimes our clients are very, very racist,
Mm.
right? And this example that I remember is that, I was working with another Black female, and the white client came in, and she said, she did a little jingle, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch a nigger by the toe kind of thing.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was so taken aback. But at the same time, organizations tend to bury that kind of thing by saying, hey, when you're coming to work, these are things that, people will say to you, and you need to figure out how to make it not impact you. You basically don't take it personally, right?
Wow.
Yeah. And I just remember not being necessarily upset with the client, because at the time, this person, your mental state is we can negotiate that conversation, let's just say that. But I remember the thing that really impacted me was the response of my supervisor and of the clinical staff. And I remember at that point saying, how can you say that you have the client's well-being in mind, when the staff who are providing the service to the clients, our well-being is not being considered at all, right? You can't have a healthy service user if the service provider is not healthy,
Right.
right?
Right.
So what materialized from that is, however it happened, I was asked to engage in changing the support procedure for staff when they are involved in traumatic experiences.
Hmm.
And from that one document that I had a part in drafting, there were other, from the agency policy writer. She sent out an email to all the frontline staff saying, hey, this is an opportunity for you to have a say in how we support you, and how we support you in providing services to our clients. So so I took that as the first opportunity to say, you know what, we are not powerless in this situation. Even as workers, you might feel like, oh, I don't want to go up against the establishment. You don't have to, everything that you do doesn't have to be overt and go in with fists raised and guns blazing and all that. You don't have to do all that. Small changes, incremental changes, putting in a word here and there when you have your staff meeting, saying, hey, this, you need to pay attention to this because it's impacting the quality of service that I'm able to provide. Just saying those things, and not necessarily coming off as being boisterous, because sometimes you have to be strategic, right? And to be real, at the end of the day, sometimes you have to leave. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's that it's that toxic of an environment and you have to leave. And when you do decide to leave, don't feel like, you know, I failed as a worker, I failed as a person. No, seek out other partnerships or other people who are doing who are of a similar mindset, who are doing the same work, and you feel that your work is, or your abilities are complementary to what they're doing, and find that way to re-engage. You know what I mean? And at the end of the day, it's not bad to own your own business. It's not a bad thing. You know what I mean? Because the more of us out there who are doing the work, and the more of us who are supportive of each other doing this work, the better it is for everyone.
So with that, tell us what's next in the field of social work, and you know, like kind of like a little bit of where we go from here. And I think you kind of hit on that with some things that people can do. What is something that people can do? And I really like the piece that you said about the self-care piece, because being a social worker, you take a lot of your mental, your emotional, your all of this is put into this. And then when you talk about this whole aspect of coming from a marginalized population or a numerical minority population, that could take even more, because you are tapping into some personal experiences sometimes to help you serve people. So one of the things I want you to leave us with is, what is a good self-care practice for social workers out there doing racialized work? What is a good way for a person to get engaged, just one way that a person could get more engaged in policy development? And lastly, and definitely not least, I want you to let people know, how can they get in contact with you, stay connected, follow you, tweet you, Facebook you, like you, friend you, all that good stuff. So the first question is self-care. The second one is how to engage in policy. And the third one is, how can we be friends?
Okay, so self-care is a topic that I think it's uniquely individual. You know, yes, we might all experience the same thing if we're all working at the same agency, and we know that, hey, we got to work 12 hours for 3 days this week, and that means, you know, by the time you're done, you can't even think. You know what I mean? How I would approach self-care is entirely different than how you would. What I would suggest is find the thing that works for you. You know what I mean? If it's sleep, hey, there's nothing wrong with that. Get some sleep. You know what I mean? For me, I'm a conversational type of person. So and I'm also a thinker. So while I'm experiencing an issue, if I have a person who's there to listen to me while I'm processing what's happening to me, it helps me to problem solve at the same time. So it's not necessarily that I have to physically, you know, go to the gym and work out, or play a video game or something. It's a conversational type of reinforcement that I need to help me feel better and feel like, okay, what I'm saying makes sense, what I'm saying doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? How do I fix this? It's communal for me. It's conversational. So that might not be it for everybody. You know what I mean? That might seem very simple and doesn't seem like it's something that would help other people, but that's what helps me. So, you know, figure out what works best for you. Figure out what you're comfortable with and do that thing that you're comfortable with. You know what I mean? As long as it's something productive and helpful and healthy for you. You know what I mean? Because self-care is necessary when there's moderation to it also, right? And you know, least and most of all is recognize that, you know what, work is work. It's called work for a reason. And you have to be able to disengage at some point and say, you know what, I'm not taking this home with me anymore because it's impacting me, it's impacting my family, and it's not healthy. I can't provide the best quality of care to my clients if I'm taking work home and bringing it back to work.
Right. And how can people start to get involved in policy?
You know what? Something as simple as writing a petition or signing a petition, something that you're passionate about. You know, pay attention to news reports. Try not to, you know, pay too much attention to the gossip stuff, but things that have validity to them. You know what I mean? Like, we have right now, we have the anti-Black racism movement in education that's sweeping across Ontario right now, and I believe that is going to sweep across Canada very, very soon. And think about the legitimacy of the people who are participating. You know what I mean? Like, you want to get involved in things where the people are of note or of reputation. You know what I mean? And you're not getting involved in something that's going to put a spin on you that is going to you know, close career doors or career advancing doors. You want to make sure that what you're saying makes sense to your audience as well, and it's something that you can easily get support off of, right? So right now there's a petition circulating. It's at the second reading stage of in the policy process about the student loans policy, right? Mm-hmm. So there's about I believe at this point there's about 60,000 signatures already assigned to this petition. We need about 75,000 to really make a stamp to say, hey, this is something you need to pay attention to. Our government, you know, your budget said you were going to do this. Here are, you know, an additional 75,000 people saying, yes, it's great what you did, but you need to do some more, right? Okay. And the first stage, if you don't even know how to sign a petition, whatever, visit your member of parliament's office, their constituency office. Your elected officials are there. You elected them, so you have the right to go and speak to them, and you have the right for them. You know, however busy they are, you have the right to speak to them, even for 10 minutes, mm-hmm. right? So you can walk into their office. You know, right. You elected them, so you have access to them.
Okay, no, that's a good point. And how can people get in contact and stay engaged with you?
All right, the best way to connect with me is on Facebook. If you just get on Candace Kachapwa on Facebook, you'll find me. On LinkedIn, you just type in my name, you'll find me. On Twitter, let me just pull it up real quick.
And tell me, I'm typing it in the chat. How do you spell your first and last name so that they can type it in and go check you out?
Okay, on Facebook, my first name is Candies, and my last name is Kotchapaw. On Twitter, I'll just pull it up right now. It's at Candace Kachap1, at Candies Kotchap number 1. That's where you can find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time and your talent with us. This has been an edition of The Counter Narrative, where we have discussed the politics of social work. Do racialized social workers belong in policy development? And we've been talking to Candace, and she's been sharing her work in her research as a MSW on racialized social workers. If you want to get in contact with her, make sure, if you're here live, then make sure just go over to the chat, and her name is spelled there, and you can check her out on Facebook. And if you're watching the replay and you can't see the chat, her name is spelled Candies. Last name is spelled Kotchapaw. Did I spell it right?
You got it.
Gold star for me. All right. And if you want to get more of these shows, remember The Counter Narrative airs every Saturday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time. The next show is going to be on Ebony Faces and Ivory Towers. So Black women in academia at predominantly white institutions. That's going to be two. There's going to be two editions. There's going to be a part 1 and a part 2. So that's going to be on actually Saturday and Sunday, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you for everyone who has engaged with us in the chat. Shout out to Benjamin. Shout out to Cinthu. Shout out to Pastor Maureen and everyone else who didn't feel like necessarily posting their name. But remember, if you don't post your name, if you don't say hi, then I don't get to see you and shout you out. And if you have not subscribed already, please do click below and subscribe. Candace, do you have a final thought you want to say before we close out?
I just want to thank you, Rasheem, for the opportunity to speak with you on this topic. I do recognize that that you're busy with your own work, and we're just trying to get by at the same time, you know. So I really wanted to express my gratitude for you taking the time and considering me to be on your program, and for the opportunity to engage with people on social media, because you know, this topic is something that's very important. So I appreciate you for that. And I also want to thank everyone for who decided and was able to log in and participate that way too. I do appreciate all of your participation.
Absolutely, my pleasure having you. Thank you again for watching The Counter Narrative. This is Rasheem. Have a good night.
Bye, everyone.